So, good afternoon, students. So, welcome you all to another session. So, let's begin with what we have started off in the previous session. So, in the last class, we have started off with water pollution. So, after completing with the air pollution, we have begun with the water pollution. And under water pollution, we have started talking about various water pollutants, right? So, in that, we have taken up with two different types of water pollutants in the previous session. One was with regards to the domestic sewage, one of the major types of sources of water pollutants. This is nothing but the domestic sewage. The second type of water pollutants, what we have seen is with regards to the industrial pollutants. So two major types of water pollutants we have already discussed in the previous session, right? That is the domestic sewage as well as the other one, which is called the industrial wastewaters, right? So in this session, let us continue with the water pollution, and we'll see we have two more small topics with regards to the different types of water pollutants. So let us take up with those two different types of water pollutants again, along with the two what we have already taken up, and then we'll get into what are the effects which are actually caused by water pollutants and how do we control water pollution. And also we have one case study with regards to integrated wastewater management. So that's what we'll be taking up in this particular session. Let us first begin with the different types of water pollutants what we have. So we have started off with the water pollution. So we have started off with water pollution. So under water pollution, we have started discussing about the different types of water pollutants, where the first type of water pollutants what we saw was with regards to the domestic sewage. Second thing is the industrial pollutants. Let us now take up with the third type of water pollutant, which is called the thermal pollution. Thermal pollution. So let us see what are the sources of this particular thermal pollution and what effects does it actually lead to. So talking about thermal pollution, so we know that most of the industries are actually located at the beds of the river bodies or at the beds of the water bodies, very close to the water habitat. That's what we have also seen when we were discussing in the last topic when we were talking about industrial pollutants. Similarly, there are certain industries which use water as a coolant, right? For several processes that take place in that particular industry, water is used as a coolant. Since water is used as a coolant, the resultant what is obtained is nothing but the hot water. This hot water which is formed in these particular industries are actually said to be directed into the close by water bodies that are present. So this deposition of hot water into the close by water bodies, we will start calling it as thermal pollution. Right? So what do we mean by thermal pollution? Thermal is something referred to as the temperature. Disposal of the hot waters which are being obtained from the coolant, which has been used for the coolants. So those hot water, once it is being released into the water bodies, it would start making the entire water body hot, as a result of which it would lead to some sort of pollution. And this type of pollution, we would start calling it as the thermal pollution. One of the major industries which is majorly responsible for this thermal pollution is the thermal power plants, where actually the electricity is being generated. One of the major source for this thermal pollution is the thermal power plants, which usually leads to the release of this hot water, and all the hot water that is actually being released would be disposed of into the nearby water bodies, as a result of which leading to this sort of pollution, what we call it as thermal pollution. Now, what are the effects caused by this thermal pollution? Let us take up with the effects that are caused by thermal pollution. So the sources of thermal pollution, it would be mostly the industrial, which is the thermal power plant, electricity generating power plants. Now, what effects does this thermal pollution actually lead to? Now, since hot water is being deposited into the water bodies, one, because of that hot water, it would lead to the destruction, or they would start destroying, it would start destroying the aquatic flora and fauna. Right? It will start destroying the aquatic flora and fauna, because we know that most of the organisms will not be able to tolerate such high temperatures. And when hot water is released into the water bodies, what would happen? All the flora and fauna that is present there would be mostly damaged. Right? This is the first thing that it leads to. Second thing, the reason for this is, again, we know that most of the organisms present in water, they are said to be stenothermal organisms. They are said to be stenothermal organisms. Now we know what do we mean by stenothermal organisms. We have already discussed about this when we were talking about our last chapter, organisms and populations, stenothermal, eurythermal organisms. Stenothermal organisms are the ones which do not have the ability to tolerate wide fluctuations in temperature. So they will be able to tolerate only a particular temperature, say around 20 degrees centigrade. Now, when the hot water comes into that particular place, the temperature would rise to say 35 to 40 degrees centigrade also. So due to this increase in the temperature, all of these organisms will not be able to survive in those hot temperatures. And again, one more thing what happens is, since these organisms do not have the ability to migrate from that region to a better place, they will not be able to survive. It will lead to the destruction of all of these organisms. This is the second effect that is seen. Third effect that is seen is with regards to the fishes. Right. So fishes, again, the process of spawning is being affected. Right, the process of spawning in case of fishes is being affected. So we know what do we mean by spawning, right? Spawning is nothing but the process of breeding. So the breeding in these organisms would be highly affected, and also the hatching of the eggs also would be affected. So the process of breeding, laying eggs, as well as hatching of the eggs also would be affected because of this particular thermal pollution. As a result of which, the mortality rate in case of fishes will drastically increase. One more thing that happens here is high temperature water will start increasing the BOD levels. So we know what is BOD because in the previous session we were actually discussing about BOD, the biological oxygen demand. High temperatures would actually increase the BOD, that is the biological oxygen demand. Now we know what happens if BOD is increased. If BOD is increased, the DO levels will start decreasing, that is, the dissolved oxygen levels will start decreasing. And what happens if the dissolved oxygen levels will start decreasing? All of the organisms, aquatic organisms, will suffer from deficiency of oxygen. Now, because of this deficiency of oxygen, most of the aquatic flora and fauna will get destroyed. Right? So these are some of the effects which are actually caused because of this thermal pollution. Right? So the major thing is this thermal pollution, major effects caused by the thermal pollution. So this is the third type of pollution, types of pollutants what we have under water pollution. The fourth type what we have under water pollution will be something regarding the marine pollution. The marine pollution. Now, talking about this marine pollution. So what do we mean by this marine pollution and what are the causes or sources of this marine pollution? Two major sources of marine pollution, right? So two major sources of marine pollution. Number one, we know that all these rivers, right? All the rivers, they actually combine or meet the seas, right? So we know that all the river waters, they would be at the end, all the rivers would combine together and they join together in the seas. Right. So in this place, what exactly is happening is whenever these rivers are getting contaminated, right, contaminating with any of the domestic waste, contaminating with any of the industrial waste, contaminated with this sort of a thermal pollution, all of those waste that are now present in the rivers will be deposited into the sea. Ultimately, because rivers usually ultimately they open up into the sea. So whatever waste are actually present in the rivers, so those waste would be finally deposited into the sea, leading to something called as the marine pollution. This is one major reason for marine pollution. Number two, there is something called as oil spills. The second major reason for marine pollution is this oil spills. Now, what do we mean by this oil spills? We know that there are very huge containers which are being passed on or which keep moving from one country to the other country in the transportation of oils especially. Right. So whenever there is some sort of accidental leakage of the oil, right? Whenever there is some sort of accidental leakage of the oil, so from the containers, all the oil will now be deposited into the sea waters, into the seas. As a result of which, it would start forming some sort of marine pollution. We know that oil does not dissolve in water. Since oil does not dissolve in water, what would happen? All the oil that has been spilled from these containers would start forming a thin layer on top of the seawater. And that thin layer of oil on the seawater, we would start calling it as oil slicks. Right, we would start calling it as oil slicks. So one of the major reason, one more major cause of marine pollution is this oil slicks. One major reason is rivers, whereas as they combine into the, as they join the seas, or if at all the rivers are being polluted, whatever pollutants are there in the river will be actually dumped or it will be deposited into the sea, leading to marine pollution. Second major cause of marine pollution is this oil spills, which would lead to something called as oil slicks. So these are the two major causes of the marine pollution. Now, what would be the effects of marine pollution? What does this marine pollution actually do? What would be the effects of this marine pollution? So talking about the effects here. So the major effects which are caused by marine pollution is again the same thing. As and when the rivers starts adding all the pollutants into the seas, what would happen? The seas would become highly polluted. As a result of which, we know, since there is a lot of organic matter being deposited in the seas, what would happen? The BOD levels in the seas will start increasing. We know what happens if BOD increases, the DO levels will start decreasing. As the DO levels will start decreasing, again, what would happen? All the aquatic organisms that are there in the water will die due to lack of oxygen, due to deficiency of oxygen. One major thing. Second thing, what happens is, due to the formation of oil slicks, what would happen? There would not be enough of oxygen available to the aquatic organisms. Since the aquatic organisms will not have enough of oxygen for their survival, again, what would happen? This would again lead to the destruction or the death of several aquatic organisms, as a result of which there is loss of biodiversity happening. Loss of biodiversity. Mostly it would be biodiversity. It would be the aquatic biodiversity. So this would again lead to the loss of aquatic biodiversity, right? So these are some of the effects which are actually again shown by this marine pollution. So with this, we are done with the different types of marine pollutants. Four major types of marine pollutants what we have. First one is marine pollution, different types of water pollutions what we have. Water pollutions, first one cause is different types of, based on different types of pollutants. We have the first one to be domestic sewage, industrial waste, and the third one thermal pollution, and the fourth one is marine pollution. So these are the different types of water pollutants which usually bring about the water pollution. Now, how do we control the water pollution? So once we have identified the source as well as the effects of this particular water pollutants, how do we now control control this water pollution? So what strategies are actually available to control the water pollution? So let's take up with the control of water pollution. So the government of India in the year 1974, they came up with an act. So let us take up with control of water pollution. So how do we control the water pollution? So the government of India in the year 1974, they came up with an act which was called as the Water Act, right? And this Water Act aims to prevent and protect the water resources, right? So we call it as the Water Act, the act which is used to prevent as well as protect and control and protect the natural resources. One of the natural resources is going to be water. So to prevent and control water pollution, the Water Act was put forth by the government of India in the year 1974. So through this act, there are a lot of norms which were actually given, the ways in which the water pollution could be controlled. So let us take up with a few things of how we can actually control this water pollution. Number one, water pollution can be controlled by the removal of solid wastes. Number one, by removal of solid waste. So we know all the solid waste are actually formed from the domestic sewage. So before all of these waste, the domestic sewage is being directed into the waters, if we are able to remove the solid waste, we can start reducing this particular water pollution. This is one way how we can reduce the water pollution. Number two, whatever sewage is there, right? So whatever sewage is being formed, that sewage, when it is sent to the sewage treatment plant, so through the sewage treatment plant, majority of the as well as the toxic pollutants or harmful pollutants could be completely removed through this proper sewage treatment plant. You would have studied about the sewage treatment plant, right? So whenever this particular solid waste or any sewage waste is passed through the sewage treatment plant, we can start removing all the toxic as well as the harmful hazardous chemical substances which are present in the sewage. Thereby, we can start reducing the water pollution. Number three, Talking about industrial effluents. The industrial effluents before they are discharged into the water bodies, right? So these industrial effluents before they are actually discharged into the water bodies, they are to be neutralized and treated. They are to be neutralized and treated. Only upon neutralization of those chemicals, toxic chemicals, as well as the heavy metals, and once they are treated, only that treated water has to be sent out into the water bodies or into the streams. So all the industries, they have to strictly follow this particular process of neutralizing as well as treating the industrial wastewater before they are directly dumped or disposed into the water bodies. And the next one, what we have is one more way is for in case of thermal pollution. So to prevent the thermal pollution, all the hot water that is actually being produced in this industry has to be passed on through the cooling towers. So these cooling towers are to be arranged or to be set up in all of these industries which actually causes thermal pollution, such that when this hot water is passed through these cooling towers, the temperature will be drastically reduced, and that water having normal temperature or room temperature, now if it is being released into the water bodies, again the thermal pollution can be surely be prevented. So these are some of the ways how we can actually prevent the water pollution. Removal of solid waste from actually the domestic waste and then directing it into the water bodies. Sewage water before it is being released into the water bodies, if it is passed through the sewage treatment plant, again the amount of chemical substances, toxic substances present in the sewage can be drastically removed. Industrial effluents before it is directly released into the water bodies, they have to be neutralized and treated such that all the toxic chemicals as well as the heavy metals which are actually a part of the industrial effluents could be removed from the waste. Thermal pollution, to prevent thermal pollution, all the hot water before it is directly sent into the water bodies, it has to be passed on through the cooling towers through which it would be the temperature would drastically cool down, and that cooled water would now be released into the water bodies. These are some of the ways through which we can actually prevent water pollution. We can control or prevent water pollution. Nowadays, what most of the people and what most of the states are actually doing is they are going in for something called as ecological sanitation process. Right? So they are going in for something called as ecological sanitation. Sanitation ecological sanitation by the use of something called as eco-san toilets, right? By the use of eco-san toilets. Even in India also, a state called Kerala, right? So they are actually following this particular process by using something called as ecological sanitation, by setting up something called as eco-san toilets, ecological sanitation toilets. So what happens in this particular condition is whatever human waste are being present, or whatever human waste, or mostly the human waste that are being present, the human excreta, all that, it is being converted into dry compost. It is being converted into nutrients, right? So all the human wastes through ecological sanitation, so human waste are being converted into dry compost, right? They have been converted into nutrients. And whatever solid wastes are there, so this is one. So whatever solid wastes are there, all of these solid wastes are being converted into biofuels. Right. Through this particular ecological sanitation, what they are actually being doing is all the human waste is being converted into dry compost or the nutrients, and whatever the solid waste are actually present, they are being converted into biofuels. So this is said to be a very economical process, right? It is said to be very hygienic and it is safe also. That's the reason why most of the people, they are actually following into this process, which is called as ecological sanitation. There are certain advantages also of this process, ecological sanitation process. So what are those advantages? So let us take up with those advantages of using this ecological sanitation. Number one, the health disorders could be reduced. So we are talking about the advantages of ecological sanitation. Health disorders could be reduced. Health disorders could be drastically reduced. How health disorders could be reduced? Due to this particular process, all the water contaminated with pathogenic microorganisms could be reduced, as a result of which the health disorders, yesterday we were talking about that, right? So one of the major effects shown by this domestic sewage waste is the person would start suffering from disease conditions due to this contaminated water, maybe dysentery, all that we were talking about, typhoid, cholera, hepatitis, all. So all of those disorders could be drastically reduced by use of this ecological sanitation process. The second advantage what we get is from using this ecological sanitation process, the surface and the groundwater pollution could be drastically reduced. Right? The surface water as well as the groundwater pollution could be drastically reduced by using this ecological sanitation process. Right. And the third one is, since human waste are being converted into nutrients, so these nutrients which are actually formed, right? These nutrients which are actually formed could be used as natural fertilizers. It could be used as natural fertilizers. Since they could be used as a natural fertilizers, these natural fertilizers could be replaced by the synthetic fertilizers, right? So we can replace the synthetic fertilizers with the help of these natural fertilizers, which are being produced through this particular process of ecological sanitation. Right. So through this way, there are several states who are now showing a lot of interest in setting up this ecological sanitation process, so that the water pollution could be highly controlled, and at the same time, the fertilizers, harmful chemical fertilizers, could be reduced by using these particular natural fertilizers, which are formed through this excretory waste. Right. So major thing in ecological sanitation is all the human waste are being converted into dry compost, as a result of which the soil pollution could be reduced through this one. Similarly, the water pollution also could be reduced through this ecological sanitation process. So this is one more way how we can actually control the water pollution. So a few ways how water pollution can be controlled. Right. Now we have one case study. Right. So case study with regards to the wastewater management. So let's take up with in simple. I'll just give you a brief description of what people have done with regards to this integrated wastewater management. So this was integrated wastewater management was the first initiative. Right. So we'll be talking about the integrated wastewater management. So this is actually one of the process through which the wastewater would be recycled, and the same wastewater could be reused again after it has been recycled. Right? So we start calling it as integrated wastewater management. So whatever wastewater has been actually released from the domestic sewage, so that domestic sewage water through integrated wastewater management could be treated such that all the chemical substances, all the solid waste, whatever are there, all the chemical substances, toxic chemicals, the heavy metals would be removed from that polluted water, and free water, purified water would be obtained, and that purified water would now be used or recycled or reused for household purposes. Right? So that is what we actually mean by integrated wastewater management. So the idea of integrated wastewater management came to people living in a small town which is called as Arcata. So people living in the small town called as Arcata. So Arcata is a small town located in the northern coast of California, right? So in California, the northern coast of California, there is this small town called as Arcata. So people of Arcata, along with some of the biologists from Humboldt University, right? Along with some of the biologists from Humboldt University, and these people from Arcata, they came up with an initiative of recycling the wastewater, so that through the process of recycling, the same wastewater could be again reused for household purposes. So for that, they came up with this system which is called as the integrated wastewater treatment. So this integrated wastewater treatment has two phases in cleaning up all the domestic sewage. There are two phases, phase 1 and phase 2. In phase 1, they started using certain physical processes to separate all the solid waste, heavy debris, all that from the water. In the second phase, all the toxic chemicals, the heavy metals were all removed from that particular thing. So this, let us take up with that. So there were two phases in this particular thing. The first phase what they did was in the first phase, what they actually did was in the first phase, all this domestic water, all these domestic water were subjected to treatment through physical processes, right? Physical processes, what they used was the process of filtration. So they used this process of filtration. They went in with process called as sedimentation, and they went in for another process called as chlorination. Right. So through these processes, physical processes such as filtration, sedimentation, and chlorination, which was actually used in the first phase. So through these physical processes, the larger solid waste that was present in the domestic water was completely removed. Right, it was completely removed. After, even though the larger solid waste and the debris was completely removed from the water, this water, after passing the first phase, also had certain toxic chemical substance as well as heavy metals in them. So to remove these toxic chemicals as well as the heavy metals, they went on in the second phase. All that was actually performed in the second phase. So what they did in the second phase was, this second phase, it consisted of, or it constituted a large area. So they chose almost 60 hectares of land, right? So almost 60 hectares of land was chosen, right? In these 60 hectares of land, they divided the 60 hectares of land into six marshes, and all of these six marshes were said to be interconnected with each other, right? So in the 68 hectares of land, they arranged six marshes, and all of these six marshes were actually said to be interconnected with each other. In all of these marshes, they started growing, in all of these six marshes, they started growing appropriate plants, algae, fungi, and bacteria. Right? In these 60 hectares of land, they divided the 60 hectares of land into six marshes, and in these six marshes, they started growing appropriate plants, algae, fungi, as well as bacteria. As all of these were grown, what happened next? From the first phase, whatever water was obtained, or whatever purified water, or partially purified water, or the water containing only the chemicals, toxic chemicals, as well as heavy metals were obtained here, this water now was passed on into the second phase. It was passed on into all of these particular plants, algae, fungi, as well as bacteria. As and when this water from the first phase was passed on into the second phase, as they started passing into the plants, algae, fungi, as well as bacteria, all of these components, or all of these things, what they did was they started, all of them together, what they did was they started neutralizing, then they started absorbing, and they started assimilating, all of those toxic chemicals as well as heavy metals. So as the water from the first phase passed into all of these six marshes, which contain the plants, algae, fungi, and bacteria, all the chemical substances and heavy metals or toxic substances which were present in the water were neutralized, absorbed, and assimilated by these plants, algae, bacteria, and fungi. So by the time the water came out of these six marshes, the water was said to be pure water, right? The water was said to be purified water. And this purified water was now again recycled to the household. It was recycled to the household. And this process was again continued. Again, from the household, whatever waste waters were given, those waste waters were now again passed on into the first phase, where they would start undergoing the process of filtration, sedimentation, chlorination. After that, it would be passed on into the second phase. Through the second phase, all the chemical substances, toxic substances, the heavy metals, all were said to be neutralized, absorbed, as well as assimilated, leading to the formation of purified water. That purified water was now again recirculated back into the household, to the peoples of Arcata, to all the houses of Arcata. So this process was actually continued. So what exactly is happening here? The process of water pollution is being drastically being reduced. All the polluted water again now, through this treatment plant, it has been converted to pure water, and the same pure water which was actually once a contaminated water, is now being recirculated back to the houses of our cattle. So this they started calling it as integrated wastewater management. So through this, all the contaminated water was again recycled to a purified water. Right. So nowadays, several people have taken this as an inspiration and they have started performing this particular way integrated wastewater treatments also, right? Where the wastewater could be again recycled and it would be reused again for the household purposes, right? So this particular people here in Arcata, they all formed a non-governmental organization, NGO, which was called as FOAM, FOAM, right? So this is actually an NGO which was started by the people of Arcata. So FOAM, FOAM stands for Friends of Arcata Marsh. So this organization was responsible for, right? It was responsible for governing all of this integrated wastewater management, and also it was responsible for safeguarding this initiative, and also it was also being responsible for creating awareness among the people such that all the household domestic wastewater, rather than directly being directed into the water bodies, it would be sent into this wastewater treatment plant for the process of recycling. Right? So this is what we have with a small case study with regards to integrated wastewater management. Right? So with this, we are done with the second type of pollution, which is called as the water pollution. So we have completed the two types of pollutions. One is called the air pollution. We took it up in the previous session, and here we have the other one, which is also called as water pollution. Right? So now let's take up with the third type of pollution what we have in the list. So the third type of pollution what we have is with regards to the soil pollution. So let us take up a few things with regards to this soil pollution. So we know that soil is again another important abiotic factor which is responsible for the survival of several living organisms on the planet Earth. So for any living organisms, for survival of any living organisms, soil is actually considered to be very, very essential. So we have already studied about the importance of soil also in our previous chapter when we were talking about organisms and population. Soil as one of the major abiotic factors. So along with temperature, light, we saw soil also to be one of the major abiotic factors. So we have already discussed about the importance of soil. So we are not going to get into the details of that. So soil, let us directly take up with soil pollution. Even though soil is very, very essential for the survival of any living organisms, through man-made activities as well as through some of the natural sources also, the soil is getting contaminated, right? So human activities, right? So human activities such as what? Dumping the garbage on the ground, right? That is one major cause of soil pollution, right? Along with that, there are use of certain agrochemicals. All of these agrochemicals, they actually reach the soil. Along with that, the process of urbanization, mining, all of these are considered as the human cause of, or the human sources or anthropogenic sources of the soil pollution. And not only that, even natural sources are also cause of soil pollution. Natural causes such as the soil erosion, right, increase with the acidity as well as the alkalinity of the soil. So these are some of the natural sources which are responsible for soil pollution. So what do we actually mean by soil pollution? If a particular soil, if it is not able to permit the growth of the plants, if it is not allowing the growth of the plant, then we would say that the soil is being polluted, right? So if a particular soil does not favor the growth of the plants, then we would start saying that the soil is being polluted. Right. So what are the major types of pollutants which are responsible for soil pollution? Majorly, we have something called as the solid wastes. Right. So one of the major cause of soil pollution is the solid wastes. Right. There is this solid waste which are actually considered to be the major source of soil pollution. Now, what do we actually mean by solid waste? Right. So solid waste are nothing but any discarded waste materials after human use in the form of rubbish or trash. We would start calling it as solid waste, right? So any sort of waste, right? Any sort of waste after human use, if it is being disposed in the form of either rubbish or trash, we would actually start calling it as the solid waste. So solid waste are actually considered as the major cause of this particular soil pollution. So whenever we talk about solid waste, there are different types of solid waste. Let us take up with those different types of solid waste, and then we'll see what are the effects which are actually shown by the solid waste. So different types of solid waste what we have. Number one, we have something called as municipal waste. Municipal solid waste. So this is the first type of solid waste what we have. So we are talking about the source of the solid waste or the source of soil pollution. Major one is the municipal solid waste. Now what all does the municipal solid waste actually include? The waste that are being released from houses, right? From offices, waste from the schools, waste from the stores, all of these would start constituting municipal solid waste. So what are the different types of waste that has been disposed from the houses, schools, offices, stores, etc.? What are those types of waste? Kitchen waste fall under municipal waste, right? So we have something called as the leaf of fruits, the vegetables, the remain food also falls under municipal waste, right? So all the remain foods that is present, so everything falls under this particular municipal waste. And along with that, we also have some of the glass containers, we have the plastic containers, right? All of these, some sort of cans, all of them fall under the municipal solid waste, right? So we can take the list here. It includes food remains, it includes glass containers, the plastic containers, it includes rubber, it includes leather. So all of them fall under the category of municipal waste. Majorly, the major source of municipal waste is nothing but homes, offices, schools, stores, etc. Whatever waste comes out of all of these places, we will start classifying them as municipal waste. The second type of solid waste, we start calling it as industrial solid waste. Industrial solid waste. So the major source of industrial solid waste are, again, from the name itself we can make out, industries, right? Industries such as we have the paper mills, we have the oil refineries, any sort of industries, paper mills, oil industries, the chemical factories, right? Any sort of industry, the thermal power plants, any sort of waste which comes out of the industry, we will start classifying them as the industrial waste. The third type of waste, solid waste, can be obtained from, we usually call it as the electronic waste. The electronic waste. So whenever we talk about the electronic waste, we also usually call it as e-wastes. E-wastes are nothing but the electronic waste. The wastes which are actually considered to be the electronic appliances. Once we start using the appliances and after a period of time we start disposing it. All of those disposed electronic appliances constitute the electronic waste, right? All of these, there are many, some of which includes the used refrigerators, old refrigerators, we have the air conditioners, right? So we have the televisions, we have the radios, we have the stereo sets, right? Then we have the computers, the laptops, the cell phones. All of them, once they are disposed, it will start causing these electronic, we start calling them as electronic solid waste, right? So these electronic appliances are actually manufactured using several harmful chemical substances also. So people who are actually working in this particular manufacturing unit, they are actually prone to several effects because they are continuously being exposed to all of these chemical substances. So all of them together, it will start constituting the electronic waste. Right. The next category what we have, number 4, next type of solid waste what we have is called biomedical solid wastes. Biomedical waste. So these biomedical waste, from the name itself, we can again make out, right? So the waste that are actually formed during the process of diagnosis of any sort of a disease, during the treatment of any sort of a disease, during the process of immunization of both plants and animals as well as humans, all of the waste that are being released during these processes, either diagnosis or treatment or immunization of humans as well as animals, all the waste released, we would start classifying them as biomedical waste. So what are the major areas from where we get this biomedical waste? Mostly the hospitals, right? We have the hospitals, we have the pathological laboratories, diagnostic laboratories, right? We have the medical colleges, we have the veterinary hospitals. So from all of these places, whatever waste are being released, we start calling it as the biomedical waste. Right. And the last one what we have, last type of solid waste what we have is called the agricultural waste or the agrochemical wastes. The agrochemical wastes. So all these agrochemical waste, so what does this include? All the fertilizers such as the pesticides, the herbicides. So all of them constitute the agrochemical waste. So all these fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, insecticides, all of them, along with water pollution, they also lead to this sort of soil pollution also. So these are the major sources of the soil pollution. And the major sources of soil pollution is through solid waste. From where do we get solid waste? We get solid waste from the households, offices, from the industries, from the electronic appliances which are being discarded, from the biomedical services, from the agricultural products. So from all of these things, solid waste are being released, and all of these solid waste are actually said to be disposed into the soil, and all of them would start bringing about this soil pollution. Right? Everything together will start bringing about the soil pollution. Now, what are the different ways, or what are the effects which are actually caused by soil pollution? So let us take up with the few effects which are actually caused by soil pollution. Number one. So let us take up with the effects which are caused by soil pollution. So what effects are is actually seen? Now, since it is a pollutant, definitely there should be some effects caused by this sort of pollution. So what are the effects which are actually caused by soil pollution? Number one, soil pollution. Soil pollution would make the land unfavorable for plant growth. It would make the land unfavorable for the plant growth. Right, it would start making the land unfavorable for plant growth. So all that area, whichever is being polluted with the soil, it would make the soil unfavorable for plant growth, and also it would start making the soil in and around that area barren. So we know what we mean by barren land. Barren land is nothing but the land which does not favor the growth of any plants. We start calling it as a barren land. So all that particular area would start becoming barren. It would start becoming barren. The second thing, due to the disposal of all this municipal waste, talking about municipal waste, due to disposal of all the municipal waste in the form of trash, garbage, etc., it starts creating a foul smell. Foul smell. And this foul smell would again lead to some sort of air pollution. And also, it would start making that area unfavorable for living. You would have observed that, right? If more and more of municipal waste is being dumped in one particular area, it would start generating very foul smell. Because of that, people will not be able to survive or stay in that particular surroundings because of that very pungent smell that actually comes out from that garbage. So again, it would start creating foul smell. Because of this, it would lead to air pollution, and at the same time, it would make that particular area unsuitable for living. This is the second thing that is happening. The third thing that happens is, or the third effect is, burnt wastes. Sometimes what happens is, as and when the wastes start increasing, people will start burning those wastes. Once the result of this burnt waste, it would again start releasing a lot of chemical substances and gases into the atmosphere, and those gases would lead to again some sort of air pollution. It would lead to this air pollution. Another thing that is actually happening here, it would lead to air pollution. Now, talking about the industrial waste, what happens with regards to the industrial waste? As the industry starts giving out its chemical substances, and as those chemical, highly toxic chemical substances and heavy metals are being disposed in the soil, the acidity of the soil starts increasing. So soil acidity increases. As the soil acidity increases, two things happen. One, the plants will not be able to grow in that particular region because of increased acidic nature of the soil. Second one, it would start causing severe threat to the terrestrial organisms who are actually living in that particular place. So two things happen once the soil acidity increases. Number one, the plants will not be able to grow in that highly acidic nature of the soil. Number two, all the terrestrial organisms which are actually living in that particular place will find it very, very difficult for them to survive because of those chemical substances. So this is with regards to industrial waste. Talking about the biomedical waste. When these biomedical wastes are actually released, biomedical waste consists of several hazardous chemicals. They contain several hazardous chemicals as well as several pathogenic organisms. Now, when this pathogenic organisms and hazardous chemicals gets into the water, again, it would start causing severe disease condition in case of animals as well as humans also, whenever we start coming across it, right? So this is one more effect which is actually cause of biomedical waste. Biomedical waste actually is the same. Scientists say that this is one of the most severe effects caused to the humans as well as animals is the disposal of these biomedical waste. Right. And talking about the last one, agrochemical waste, by the release of these herbicides and pesticides, by the release of herbicides and pesticides. So we know what do they do? Herbicides and pesticides. So we know what actually the herbicides and pesticides actually do. So the herbicides and pesticides, we know they would protect the crop plant from the herbs as well as pests, even the insecticides also. But along with that, it would start increasing the crop productivity. But along with that, what it does is it would start reducing the soil fertility. So all of these agrochemicals, it would start reducing the soil fertility. So the soil fertility will be reduced. How the soil fertility is being reduced? These herbicides as well as the pesticides, rather than acting on the target organisms, they would start acting on the non-target organisms also. Non-target organisms such as bacteria that is present in the soil, as well as the earthworms that are present in the soil, just to name a few. Once these herbicides and pesticides and insecticides, once they start acting on the bacteria, what happens? The bacteria will no longer be able to fix atmospheric nitrogen. You know, the major role of bacteria in the soil is to fix nitrogen. So they will no longer be able to fix atmospheric nitrogen. Second, once these herbicides and pesticides, once they start acting on the earthworms will no longer be able to make the soil fertile. As a result of which, the soil fertility also will start decreasing. So these are some of the effects, what we can say, effects related to the solid waste pollution, right? So soil pollution, major cause of soil pollution is this solid waste, and we have seen different sources of this solid waste, and along with that, what effects does this solid waste actually bring about? Right. So once we are done with the effects, in the next session, let us take up with the ways how we can control the soil pollution. So what are the different strategies which are put forth to control the soil pollution? So that we'll take up in the next session. Right? Thank you.